The sky was dark, heavy clouds rolling over the alien river. The wind howled through the valley, carrying the smell of rain and wet earth. The human man stood at the edge of the bank, his boots sinking into the soft mud. He had come here only to gather water. But something felt wrong. The river, usually calm and slow, was wild and restless tonight. Waves crashed against the stones as if the water itself was angry. Lightning flashed across the sky, lighting up the dark forest for just a moment. In that flash, he thought he saw movement, something small, struggling against the current. At first, he thought it was a piece of debris, a branch caught in the water. But then another flash of lightning came, and his heart froze. It was not a branch. It was a child, her small head barely above the surface, her arms thrashing weakly before disappearing under the raging waves. Without thinking, he dropped the water container and ran forward. The cold wind bit into his skin as he tore off his jacket. The river roared louder, daring him to step inside. But he did not hesitate. He jumped. The freezing water hit him like a wall. It stole his breath, clawing at his chest. The current pulled him sideways, spinning him as if he was nothing but a leaf. He fought against it, his muscles burning, his eyes scanning the surface for the small figure. For a moment, he saw nothing, just dark water and foaming waves. Then he spotted her again, floating face down, her glowing skin faint under the storm's shadow. He pushed forward, every stroke feeling slower as the cold seeped into his bones. The current tried to pull her away, but he caught her arm just in time. She was limp in his grasp. Her body felt too light, too fragile. He turned her over, her face pale. Eyes closed, a strange pattern of faint glowing lines ran along her cheeks and neck. He had never seen anyone like her before, not human. But not like any alien species he had met either. The rain poured harder, soaking them both. He tried to call out to her, but his voice was swallowed by the storm, holding her tightly against his chest. He kicked towards the shore. The current fought him every step, pulling him down, pushing him sideways. His lungs burned, his arms ached, but he would not let go. At last, his feet found the riverbed. He stumbled forward. Dragging her out of the water onto the muddy ground, she lay still, her small chest barely moving. He pressed his ear to her mouth, a weak breath, but it was there. Relief washed over him. But the danger was far from over. The wind was icy, the rain relentless. If she stayed here in the cold, she would not survive. He slipped his jacket back on and wrapped it around her tiny body. She made a faint sound, something like a whisper. It was not in his language. He leaned closer, hearing soft words that meant nothing to him, but carried the weight of fear and desperation. Her glowing eyes flickered open for just a second, meeting his gaze before closing again. Something about that brief look hit him deep inside. Trust. As fragile as the girl herself had passed between them, he picked her up in his arms. Her head resting against his shoulder, her wet hair clung to his shirt, her fingers twitching weakly as if trying to hold on. The storm raged around them. Every step he took on the muddy path felt heavier. The trees swayed and groaned, branches snapping in the wind. He knew the walk back to his small home would be long and dangerous. But there was no other choice as he moved through the forest. The sound of the river faded, replaced by the pounding of rain on leaves, now and then. Lightning lit the path for a moment, then left him in darkness again. The girl shifted in his arms. A faint whimper escaping her lips, he spoke softly. Even though she probably could not understand him, "It's all right, you're safe now." He did not know if that was true. He did not know who she was, where she had come from, or why she was in the river. But he knew one thing: he could not leave her. By the time his home came into view, his legs were trembling from the effort. The small wooden door looked more welcoming than it ever had. He kicked it open gently, stepping inside and laying her down on the softest blanket he owned. The dim light from the old lantern fell across her face. She looked even smaller now, wrapped in the heavy jacket, her strange glowing markings dimming as she slept. He knelt beside her, brushing wet hair away from her eyes. Outside, the storm still roared, but inside, a different storm was beginning, one that would change both of their lives forever. The room was warm compared to the storm outside. The fire in the corner crackled softly, its orange light flickering against the wooden walls. The human man removed his soaked shirt and hung it near the fire, keeping one eye on the small alien girl resting under his thick jacket. Her breathing was shallow but steady. For a moment, he simply watched her. Wondering who she was and how she ended up in the raging river, he found an old towel and carefully dried her hair. It was softer than he expected, fine and silky, with strands that shimmered faintly under the lantern light. She stirred slightly, her glowing skin shifting in brightness, when her eyes opened. He froze. Two large, luminous eyes stared at him, not with gratitude, but with fear. She sat up quickly, pulling the jacket tighter around her small frame. Her back pressed against the wall as if trying to vanish into it. "It's all right," he said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. But she didn't relax. Her voice trembled as she spoke in broken basic. "You? Take me back. Sell me." The words hit him like a stone. "Sell you?" "No, I'm not," he started, but she interrupted. "They always sell," she said, her small hands gripping the jacket's edges. Her knuckles pale, her eyes darted to the door, then the window, as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. He crouched down so he wouldn't tower over her. "No one's going to hurt you here," he said slowly, making sure she could understand. She shook her head, still doubtful. Her small body trembled from both the cold and something deeper, fear that had been with her far longer than the storm. He reached for a small wooden bowl and poured in warm broth he had prepared earlier. The smell filled the room. Herbs, root vegetables, a hint of spice. He placed it on the table and stepped back, giving her space. She eyed the food cautiously, her gaze flicking between him and the steaming bowl. After a long pause, she slid down from the blanket and approached slowly. She sniffed the broth, then took a tiny sip. Her eyes widened slightly at the warmth, and she drank more. But even as she ate, she kept glancing at the door. He sat in the chair across the room, pretending to busy himself with the fire. He didn't want to crowd her. She finished half the bowl before setting it down and retreating back to her corner. Her voice was quiet when she spoke again. "They come. Who?" he asked. "Hunters," she whispered. The words sent a chill through him. She explained in short, broken sentences. She had escaped from a group of alien traders, people who captured and sold her kind like animals. They had marked her with glowing lines to show she belonged to them. If they found her, she would be taken again, or worse. His hands tightened into fists. He had seen alien cruelty before, but never this close, never this personal. "How far behind are they?" he asked. She shook her head, unsure, but the way she kept glancing at the door told him she believed they could arrive at any moment. The wind howled outside, but inside the room, another storm brewed. The choice he would have to make. He could pretend he never saw her, send her away before trouble reached him. That was what most people here would do. But as he looked at the small girl clutching his jacket like a lifeline, he knew he wouldn't. He had risked his life to pull her from the river. He wasn't about to throw her back into danger now. "You can stay here tonight," he said finally. Her eyes flicked toward him, uncertain. "And after?" she asked. "After?" He hesitated. "We'll see." He wasn't sure yet how he would keep her safe, but he would find a way. The girl studied him for a long time, her glowing eyes seeming to search for lies when she didn't find any. Her shoulders lowered slightly. She curled back under the blanket, still watching him, but no longer pressed so tightly against the wall. In the firelight, she looked even smaller. He wondered how someone so fragile could have survived whatever horrors she had escaped from. Outside, the storm began to fade. the rain slowing to a steady drizzle. But inside, he could still feel the tension. This was only the beginning. If the hunters were real, and he had no doubt they were, they would come. And when they did, he would be ready. He didn't know why he felt so certain, but deep inside, he had already made his choice. This tiny alien girl was under his protection now, and he intended to keep her safe, no matter the cost. The morning came with a pale, weak light that barely touched the edge of the forest. The air was heavy after the storm, carrying the smell of wet leaves and distant smoke. The human man stepped outside his small home, his boots sinking slightly. Into the damp earth, he carried a basket for supplies, thinking he would gather food from the market before anyone else woke. But as he walked toward the main road, something made him stop. A faint humming sound drifted from above when he looked up. He saw a small black shape gliding across the cloudy sky. It was no bird, it was a drone. The machine's red scanning lights swept across the ground as it moved slowly over the settlement. He knew that kind of drone alien patrol tech used by trackers and bounty hunters. His jaw tightened. They were looking for someone. And he already knew who. Back inside, the tiny alien girl was sitting on the floor, folding the corner of the blanket in her hands. When she saw his face, her glowing eyes widened. "They're here," she asked in a trembling voice. He nodded slowly. "Not here yet, but close." She crawled back into the shadow of the table, pulling the blanket with her. Her breathing quickened, and she whispered something in her own language. The words, shaking like her hands, he crouched beside her. "They won't take you," he said firmly. But she shook her head. "They always take. Always." The fear in her voice wasn't just from today. It was old, built over years of running and hiding. She didn't believe anyone could stop them. The settlement was already waking up. From the window, he could see people moving about, pretending not to notice the drone above. No one wanted trouble. No one would stand against alien trackers if they knew she was here. They would turn her in without a second thought, he realized. Staying in the house was too dangerous if the hunters searched every building. She wouldn't have a chance. "We're leaving," he said. Her head shot up. "Where?" "Somewhere they won't look." He grabbed a leather pack from the shelf and began stuffing it with food, a water flask, and an old survival blanket. She hesitated, clutching the jacket he had given her, but when he opened the door, she stood and followed. Her small feet silent on the wooden floor. The forest loomed ahead, its tall trees still dripping with last night's rain. The air inside was cooler, darker, and filled with the sound of distant dripping water. They moved quickly, the man keeping a steady pace while glancing behind now and then. The girl stayed close, gripping the side of his shirt so she wouldn't lose him. After an hour, they reached a hollow between two large roots where the ground dipped low. It was a small clearing surrounded by thick ferns, easy to hide in, hard to see from above. "This will do for now," he said. She sat on the blanket, he spread out, her eyes scanning the treetops nervously. "Will they find us?" she asked. "Not if we're careful," he replied, though he wasn't certain. He left her there for a short time, telling her to stay hidden while he searched for fresh water. When he returned, he noticed something. The forest was quiet. Two quiet birds and small creatures had gone still. It was the kind of silence that came when predators were near. He crouched low, motioning for her to stay silent. Through the leaves, he saw movement, tall figures in dark armor, their helmets reflecting the dim forest light. Hunters. They moved slowly, scanning the ground with strange devices. One of them knelt, touching the wet soil where their footprints had been. His stomach tightened. They were close, much closer than he wanted. The girl clutched his arm, her tiny fingers digging into his sleeve. Her eyes were wide, but she didn't make a sound. The hunters moved in the other direction, but he knew it wouldn't be long before they looped back. "We can't stay here," he whispered. he packed quickly. Lifting her into his arms so they could move faster, they weaved through narrow trails and over fallen logs, every step taking them deeper into the forest. Hours passed, and the light began to fade again. They stopped by a small stream to rest. The girl sat on the bank, dipping her fingers into the water for the first time. Since the morning, her face softened. She realized she had been holding her fear in all day, hiding it behind silence. "Why help me?" she asked suddenly. He looked at her, unsure how to answer. Finally, he said, "'Cause no one else would." She studied him for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then she said something quietly, almost like a promise. "I stay with you. Forever." Before he could respond, a faint metallic hum reached his ears. He froze. The hunters were near again. They didn't stop moving until the night sky was above them. The forest had thinned into a place where tall trees stood far apart, letting silver moonlight spill through the branches. The air here was cooler, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers mixed with damp earth. The human man slowed his pace, setting the tiny alien girl down on a patch of soft moss. She sank too. The ground, her small chest rising and falling quickly. "You're tired," he said quietly. She nodded. Wrapping the jacket tighter around herself, he built a small fire in a shallow pit, covering it with stones so the glow would not be seen from far away. The flames danced softly, their warmth pushing back the night chill. From his pack, he took out dried meat and small packets of grain. He showed her how to crush the grain in a wooden bowl and mix it with hot water until it became thick and warm. She copied him, her hands small but quick. When she tasted the food, her eyes softened. And for the first time, she let a faint smile touch her lips. They ate in silence, the fire crackling between them. Above, the stars shone bright and strange, not the same as the skies he had known on Earth. The girl tilted her head back, watching them. After a long moment, she spoke, her voice quiet. "Your world. Far." He nodded. "Very far." She hesitated, then asked, "Why leave it?" He poked at the fire, thinking, "Sometimes you have to leave home to find what matters." He said. She seemed to think about that, her glowing eyes reflecting the flames. Later, when the fire was low, he gave her one of his blankets. She wrapped herself in it, but didn't lie down right away. Instead, she shifted closer to him, her small frame still trembling. He realized she wasn't just cold, she was afraid. He spoke gently. "You're safe here." Her answer came slowly, as if she was unsure of the words. "With you." "Safe." Then she rested her head lightly against his side. It was a simple act, but he felt the weight of it. Trust, fragile and rare. Over the next 2 days, they stayed hidden deep in the forest. He showed her how to catch fish using a sharpened stick. At first, she laughed when he missed, covering her mouth shyly, but when she caught one herself, her smile was wide and bright. He found himself smiling back, a rare thing for him. She taught him small words from her language: food, water, safe, and friend. Her voice carried a soft, musical tone when she spoke in her tongue. And when he repeated the words badly, she laughed again. The sound light in the quiet forest. At night, they would sit close to the fire. She told him little bits of her story, never the full thing, but enough. Her people had been scattered, many taken by traders. She had been alone for a long time before the river. Hiding, always moving, he listened without pushing for more. Some wounds took time before they could be touched. On the third night, as they watched the fire together, she looked up at him suddenly. "Why you saved me?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "Because no one else would," he said again. She was quiet, studying his face. Then, very softly, she said, "Then I am yours. Forever." The words caught him off guard. He didn't know if she meant them in the way humans understood, but the way she said it was not childish. It was a promise. Before he could answer, the sharp snap of a twig broke the stillness. They both turned, in the dark beyond the firelight. A shadow moved. He stood quickly, pushing her gently behind him. Another sound came, low voices speaking in a language he didn't recognize. The hunters, they had found their trail again. He put out the fire in a rush, covering the embers with dirt. "Stay close to me," he whispered, her small hand gripped his tightly, her glowing eyes wide in the dark. They moved silently through the trees. Every step measured. The forest seemed to close in around them. The night alive with distant footsteps, she stayed close enough that he could feel her trembling through their joined hands. They didn't stop until they reached a rocky outcrop. There, hidden between two large stones, was a narrow hollow just big enough for the two of them. They crouched inside, breathless. The sound of the hunters grew louder, their boots crunching. Over leaves, one beam of light swept across the rocks. Passing just above their heads, the girl pressed herself against him, her heart beating fast against his chest. He kept still, waiting. Finally, the sounds faded. The hunters moving past. They stayed in the hollow long after the danger had passed. The girl didn't move away. In the silence, he could feel her trust. Settled deeper, and he knew whatever came next, they would face it together. The sun had barely risen when the sound of engines echoed through the forest. It was a deep, steady hum, too controlled to be a wild creature. The human man woke instantly, his instincts sharp. The tiny alien girl was already awake, her glowing eyes fixed on the direction of the sound. "They found us," she whispered, her voice shaking. He didn't need to ask how she knew. She could feel it, the same way prey feels the predator's shadow before it strikes. They had no more time to run. He grabbed his pack. Stuffing the last of their food inside, the girl stayed close, clutching his jacket. The sound grew louder. Joined by the faint click of weapons being prepared, they reached a small clearing. But there was no safe path forward. A sharp voice called from the trees, "Human. Hand over the property, and we will let you live." The word property made his jaw clench. "She's not property," he called back, his voice hard. "Wrong answer," the voice replied. Followed by the rustle of movement, figures stepped into the clearing. For hunters tall and lean, wearing dark armor that shimmered faintly in the sunlight, their helmets had narrow slits for glowing red eyes. Each carried a long, curved weapon, half rifle, half blade. One pointed directly at the girl. She shrank back, her hand tightening around the man's arm. "You cannot protect her," the lead hunter said. "She belongs to the guild. She belongs to no one," the man replied, stepping in front of her. The hunter tilted his head. "Then you choose to die with her." The first shot came without warning. It hissed past his shoulder, burning the air. He pushed the girl to the ground behind him, pulling his small sidearm from his belt. It wasn't much against their armor, but it would have to do. The hunters moved quickly, spreading out to trap them. One lunged forward. Swinging the curved blade, he blocked with his forearm, the impact jarring his bones, then fired point blank into the hunter's shoulder. The blast sent the armored figure stumbling back, but not down. Another hunter charged from the left before the man could react. A low roar filled the clearing. From the shadows of the forest, a massive wild beast leaped forward, its fur bristling, its jaws wide. The hunters turned, startled. The creature was easily 3 times their size, with claws that dug deep into the earth. It had been stalking the area for prey. And now it found an unexpected battle. Chaos erupted. The beast lunged at the nearest hunter, knocking him to the ground. Weapons fired in all directions. Flashes of light cutting through the air. The man grabbed the girl's hand and ran for the far side of the clearing, but one hunter broke free from the fight. Blocking their path, the hunter swung his weapon, grazing the man's side and tearing his shirt. Pain flared, But he didn't stop. He rammed his shoulder into the hunter, knocking him off balance, then pulled the girl past him, behind them. The battle between the beast and the hunters raged on. One hunter screamed as the creature's claws tore into his armor. The leader shouted orders, but the noise of the fight drowned them out. The man and the girl reached the tree line, ducking into the shadows. Branches whipped against their faces as they ran. Her breathing was fast and shallow. He could feel her fear like a pulse in the air. They didn't stop until they reached a slope covered in ferns. Both collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. Blood trickled from the cut on his side, staining his shirt. The girl saw it, and her eyes widened. "You hurt," she said softly. "I'm fine," he lied. She touched the wound gently. Her small fingers warmed despite the cold air. For a moment, her glowing markings pulsed brighter. A strange heat spread through his side, dulling the pain. He stared at her. "You did that?" She nodded faintly, then looked away. "It's nothing," she whispered, though he knew it wasn't. The sound of the hunters' voices drifted faintly through the forest. They were still alive, still searching. The man knew they wouldn't stop until they had her, and now they had his scent too. "We need to move," he said. Standing slowly, she rose with him, still holding his sleeve, as they started walking again. The danger had not passed. If anything, it was closer than ever. But as he glanced down at her, at the determination in her small face, he felt the same unshakable resolve he had felt in the river. He would protect her, even if it meant fighting the entire galaxy. The forest narrowed into a steep path, the ground sloping upward as the trees grew thinner. The air was colder here, sharp against the skin, carrying the faint roar of rushing water somewhere ahead. The human man kept moving, his hands steady on the tiny alien girl's shoulder, guiding her through rocks and tangled roots. They had been walking for hours since the last fight, but the hunters had not stopped following. Every so often, he would hear the faint hum of their equipment, the crunch of armored boots on wet earth. "They're close," the girl whispered, her glowing eyes scanning the dark spaces between the trees. He nodded, saying nothing. His focus was on keeping her ahead of them. No matter what, the path ended abruptly at the edge of a high cliff. Below, the river crashed over jagged rocks, its white foam glowing faintly in the fading light. The drop was too steep to climb down. The current below was too violent to swim behind them. The sound of the hunters grew louder. Voices barked orders in their harsh language. They were being boxed in. There was no more room to run. The man stepped in front of the girl. "Stay behind me," he said firmly. She shook her head, her small hands gripping the back of his shirt. The first hunter appeared through the trees, his dark armor gleaming, weapon raised, then another and another, until all four stood at the edge of the clearing. "Blocking their only escape, hand her over," the leader said, his voice echoing cold against the cliff face. The man didn't move. "She's under my protection," he said, his voice steady. "She's property of the guild." The leader replied, "She's not property," the man shot back. The hunter's glowing red eyes narrowed. "Then you die with her." They moved in as one, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. The man pulled his sidearm, firing at the nearest figure. The shot hit the hunter's chest, staggering him but not stopping him. A second hunter swung his blade, the metal sparking as it scraped against the man's arm. Pain shot through him. But he didn't back down. He ducked under the swing and drove his shoulder into the hunter, sending him stumbling toward the cliff's edge. The girl stayed behind him, her small body trembling. She could see the hunters closing in, surrounding them. The man was fast, but there were too many. One blow knocked the weapon from his hand, sending it skidding across the ground. He picked up a fallen branch, swinging it like a staff, but it was barely enough to keep them back. The leader raised his weapon, aiming for the man's chest, and in that moment, something inside the girl broke free. Her glowing markings flared. Brighter than ever before, the lines across her skin blazed with white light, spilling into the air around her. A low hum filled the clearing. The ground beneath them trembling, the hunters hesitated, their eyes narrowing as they realized this was no ordinary child. The light burst outward in a sudden wave, blinding and hot. The force slammed into the hunters, throwing them backward. As if struck by a great wind, one tumbled over the cliff, his scream swallowed by the roar of the river below. The others hit the ground hard. Their weapons scattered. The man turned in shock. The girl stood at the center of the light, her eyes glowing so bright they were almost white. Her small frame shook with the effort, the power pouring out of her like a storm. "Stop," he called, afraid she might burn herself out. She turned her head toward him, her expression unreadable. Then, as quickly as it began, the light faded, her knees buckled, and she collapsed. He caught her before she hit the ground. Her breathing was shallow, her glowing markings now dim and fading. The remaining hunters scrambled to their feet, but they were in no shape to fight. One dragged the other toward the trees. Retreating into the forest, they didn't look back. They had seen something that shook them more than any weapon. The man held the girl close. "You saved us," he said quietly. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment. "You saved me first," she whispered. Then her head rested against his chest. Her strength gone. He knew she needed rest, food and warmth, and that this place was no longer safe. The hunters might return with more, but right now, all that mattered was getting her somewhere she could heal. He stood, lifting her in his arms. The roar of the river filled the air behind them. The forest ahead was dark, but it was the only way forward. He started walking. The night closed in around them, but the weight in his arms was a reminder of why he would keep going. No matter where the hunters came from, no matter how far they chased them, he would not let her go. The forest stretched endlessly before them, quiet except for the crunch of leaves under his boots. The man carried the tiny alien girl carefully, feeling the light rise and fall of her breathing against his chest. Her weight was almost nothing, but the responsibility he felt was heavier than any burden he had carried before. The cold air nipped at his skin, the faint smell of smoke from the distant hunters still lingering in the wind. He knew they had to move quickly, but he also knew she needed rest. After hours of walking, he reached the edge of the forest. Beyond it lay the small human settlement, the familiar sight of wooden houses and narrow dirt streets. The lamps glowed warmly in the early evening light. It felt strange to return here after so many days hiding. But it was the only place where he could give her some shelter, even if it meant taking risks. When he stepped inside his home, the warmth of the fire greeted them instantly. He set her down gently on the bed, pulling the thickest blanket over her. Her eyes half opened, and she whispered something in her language. He didn't understand the words, but the way she looked at him was enough. It was a look of safety, of trust that had survived the river, the forest, and the hunters. He made her a warm drink from herbs and honey. Holding the cup to her lips, she sipped slowly, the color returning faintly to her cheeks. "You stay now," he said softly. She tilted her head, unsure. "Stay." "Yes." He nodded. "No more running." She stared at him for a long moment before curling under the blanket. For the first time since he had found her, she slept without flinching at every sound. The next morning, he walked into the settlement's records office. The clerk looked up from a stack of papers. "Surprised to see him. I want to register someone." The man said. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "A child?" "Yes," he replied firmly. As family, he filled out the forms, writing her name in the space for given name and his own in the space for family name. When the papers were stamped, it was official. She was no longer without a home, no longer something that could be claimed by anyone else. When he returned, she was sitting by the fire, wrapped in the blanket. She looked up as he entered, her glowing eyes curious. "What you do?" she asked. He knelt beside her, placing the stamped papers in her hands. "Your name," he said simply, pointing to the writing, "same as mine now." She stared at the paper, tracing the letters slowly with her fingers. "This mean, I am yours?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Yes, and I am yours." Her eyes shone, and for a moment, she didn't speak. Then she moved forward, wrapping her small arms around him. It was the first time she had hugged him without fear. He held her close, feeling the quiet strength in that gesture. It wasn't just gratitude, it was belonging. Over the following days, the settlement noticed the girl. Some people whispered, others looked away, but no one dared approach the man or question her presence. Stories of the hunter's defeat in the forest had already begun to spread. And though no one knew the truth of what happened, they all knew enough to stay out of his way. The girl began to help around the house. She swept the floor, fetched water, and even learned how to cook some of the simpler meals. She would hum softly as she worked. Little tunes from her homeworld at night. They would sit by the fire. And he would tell her stories of Earth, green fields, wide oceans, skies filled with birds. She listened closely, her eyes always on him, as if memorizing every word. One evening, snow began to fall outside. She stood by the window, watching the flakes drift gently to the ground. The light from the fire painted her face in warm tones. She turned to him suddenly and said, "You saved me twice." "Twice?" he asked. She nodded, once from the river, once from the world. He didn't know what to say at first. Finally, he replied, "And I'll keep saving you for as long as I live." She smiled then, a soft, content smile. She came to sit beside him. Leaning against his arm, the snow kept falling. The fire kept burning outside. The galaxy was still dangerous, still full of hunters and shadows. But inside this small home, there was warmth, safety, and a promise that neither of them would face the darkness alone. The man glanced down at her as she drifted into sleep. Her breathing was steady, her glowing markings faint now but peaceful. He thought about the storm that had brought her to him, and he realized that no matter what happened next, she was his family now, forever.